looking at California County level data for, in terms of the implementation of SB 823. Just a couple words, like this is, all of this is preliminary findings. This is for internal use. This is for our strategic use. We're going to get to a point where we feel like it's cleaned enough that you could use it in external advocacy efforts. But right now, what you're seeing here is about us figuring out what we're going to do together, right? And it just needs to, like, my experience has been that, like, data, because it takes so long to meet kind of academic and research standards, it takes forever to get data publications out, but we need to have a quicker way to do it, a quicker way to get data out to make decisions that doesn't, where we don't have to have those incredibly high levels of accuracy piece, right? So it's like, this is, we want to use data to make decisions in a quick way, but we also have to be very aware that when we put data to our targets, when we're pushing for things, it needs to be absolutely solid. So we're trying to hold both pieces, right? Use data quickly, get it out there, but also make sure that we have like all of our layers of accuracy checks when anything goes to the media or to a target, okay? So this is internal stuff. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm gonna start here. With what we're going to talk about. We're not going to, we might get through stuff today, but we'll probably have to go over it again on Friday. I'm not sure. We'll see, because we got a good small group. So the first thing I want to take a look at sort of our 10-year and 3-year trends. And this is about two things. It's about celebrating our victories. Like, my experience is that we work so hard and we're grinding campaign to campaign, all the stuff happening in our own lives, our own suffering, our family's suffering, our community suffering, that we don't really get, and all the movement drama, right? That we don't often get a chance to like take a look at the shifts we've made in people's lives. And one of the ways you see them in lots of different ways, you see them through your families, through the people you love, through hearing this stuff, but you also see them in a big way through data. So I find it's really important just to like step back and say, wow, look what we did. Look what we did. The second thing though is there also is something that I'm going to call the shell game here, that also means it's important to look at this data, which is that if you think about kind of any kind of mass criminalization or mass incarceration, it's the systems that lock us up are really resilient, right? And when you close down one piece of it, often it just reinvents itself and pops up somewhere else. It's like, you know, when you put a rug down, like a wall-to-wall carpet in a room, and there's like a lump in it, you can't get rid of the lump, you're chasing it around. So we need to be aware that we may be keeping our eye just on one indicator. Oh, look, our transfers to adult court are going down, but we're not looking at what's happening at DJJ. We need to be able to look at all of these things together. And so to make sure that we're not getting kind of conned in a certain way. And one of my early experiences with this is we're working in the South in Georgia, and we were like, oh, this district's so amazing. They used to suspend and expel and paddle so many Black children, and they brought the rates all down, and we'd use it as an example. Well, it ends up they weren't suspending and expelling because they had begun to arrest, right? So it was like, I thought, oh, that looked good, but the lump had moved elsewhere and actually had moved to something more damaging. So we're going to review that. And then the second piece, we're going to move from that's like the old world where we had a DJJ piece, right, to what's ahead when we don't have that DJJ piece anywhere. We're going to look at a bunch of different data and begin to try to figure out how we use some of that data to prioritize which counties we think are most vulnerable to SB 823 implementation challenges, okay? So let's start with the 10-year trends. I want to stop there. Any questions or thoughts just before I jump into a whole bunch of data? Okay, so let's start by celebrating, right? So this is this amazing slide that Laura showed a bit last month, and looking at the arc, right? So the brown is the prosecuted as adults, right? And the kind of gray is DJJ commitments. And you're looking at this big, you know, we had in 2008 nearly 1,200 young people who were transferred to adult court and prosecuted in adult court. That goes all the way down to 64, right? You see also the steep drop after Prop 57 is passed. And then on the other hand, you also see the DJJ numbers, and you see that as the adult court numbers go down, the DJJ numbers go up, right? Now, both these things are happening at the same time, right? And so what we want to see is like, what's the impact though? If you look at them together, do we end up with more or less young people in the most harmful, deepest end of the system? Okay, like that's the question. So what we're going to do is we're going to look really closely here at this 2016 to 2018 time period. We're going to focus in on this period, and then we're going to look at how this looks county to county, because this is the big state picture. Okay, but here we're going to look county to county. Laura, do you have any other pieces to add to this?
No, I think it's just, this is why it's so important that we're looking at both of these together, because we know that in counties that are going to have a tendency for the most harsh outcomes, which include DJJ and adult court prosecution, if we take away one of those harsh outcomes, we want to make sure that we're not increasing the number of kids that are going to adult court. So the same thing we've been talking about from the beginning of the proposal for DJJ, but just important that we're looking at the numbers county by county to see what the potential impact could be.
Cool. So let's start here. This is 2016 to 2018. And so please, as you're seeing this data, if you see data and you're from a county, you're like, damn, that doesn't look like what my folks are putting out. Like, tell us. We need to. One of the things we're going to be doing is trying to say, okay, here's this data, and this data comes from the DOJ, right, Laura? Not the SEC.
Right. The numbers here all come from the Department of Justice, and we know from counties that we've collected directly from the probation departments that the numbers often look a little bit different, sometimes a lot of bit different. And it's something that fortunately SB 823 will correct. There's a provision in SB 823 that says we need to overhaul our entire system of collecting, reporting data and make sure that it has integrity and that we're learning something about what's happening to young people. And so the way that the data, it's collected at the county level, the county sends it to the state, and then the state publishes it back. And so the data all come from the counties, but they often say it's often a different department than just their probation department. So if the county comes back to you and says these numbers don't look right, you can say back to them, well, these are the numbers that you, Monterey, Santa Clara, Fresno, sent to DOJ. They're just reporting them back. So it's their responsibility to get them right.
Right on, right on. So here you have like the very hopeful number, that 406 going all the way down to 77. But then you also have this blue number climbing, right? And so this when we see this, we're like, something's happening here, right? We knew this would happen. We knew if we took away adult prosecution, we actually were hoping that we'd have more people staying in the youth. But we want to know what was the kind of net effect, okay? So we actually need a chart that takes these numbers and puts them on top of each other. Okay, so what this chart does is it says in 2016, right? So the orange are transfers to adult court. The blue are DJJ commitments, right? And so you see in 2016, you had 406 transfers and 183, right? You had almost 600 young people in the deep end, right? That year who were going into it. You see what happens is Prop 57 passes, and that 406 goes all the way down to 158. Now 183, the DJJ number, it increases, but it doesn't increase so much that it offsets this decrease. So you're going from 600 to under 400. So you're getting a net. So this is very good news, right? Although notice what happened in 2018, right? You see this number 317, it's starting to creep up, right? It's starting to creep up. So, but overall, this is like what we want to see. Okay. So I'm going to hand it to Abraham.
Yeah, thank you. Is there at this moment, are there any questions? We could take one or two questions. Are there any questions in regards to kind of the relationship between these numbers or these data sets? Okay. Do you have from Maureen Pacheco? Go ahead.
Oh, I was just wondering if you have the 317, is that broken down into kids that were sent there because of transfer motions versus kids who were just sent there without any transfer motions?
No, we don't. We don't have any information. And this is a really good point, because we know that a lot of times there's a motion for transfer filed that doesn't even make it to a hearing, or there's a hearing for transfer that doesn't result in a transfer because there's a stipulation to go to DJJ. Instead of being transferred, there's this agreement, you can go to DJJ. And those are really important pieces as we understand the county's story about what their practice is and how we advocate for ensuring that kids aren't going to go to adult court. So we don't have that information. And that's part of what, as we sort of brainstorm the next level of questions that we want to get from counties, that's at the top of the list.
Great, because I think that what's also happened in addition, I think we need to tell the story that in addition to this being transfer kids, that DJJ has done such a good job of advertising itself by coming down and testifying on behalf of our transfer kids, how wonderful it is that it's become more of a norm for courts to look towards it. So that's why I asked. Thanks.
That's a great point. Any other comments or thoughts?
Anthony, go ahead.
Oh no, I just think there's a typo on the second chart. It says transfer to youth court, but I think it's meant to say adult court.
Oh yeah. There is. Thank you, Anthony. It should be adult court. I fixed it in the little one, but I didn't fix it in the big one.
Thank you, everybody. We'll continue with the data presentation.
So this is like the good news one. And so then the next thing is like what this is this is a screenshot of an interactive dashboard that we've created that y'all can do. And down here, you see this county right here. You can select your county and look at what's happening in your specific county. Okay, so let's take a look at like those counties where it kind of looks like the state. This is Alameda. Okay, so here you see, right, that the transfers going from 8 all the way to 1 and staying at 1. You see this peak in DJJ that first year, then it goes down. This is what the net numbers look like. And this is the kind of thing we'd like to see, right? Okay, here you see that first year after, you saw a lot of probably folks that would have been transferred in here, and then you're getting down even lower. So this is like the pattern we'd like to see. But this isn't what it looks like in all counties, right? That's what it looks like across the state. But it really varies in counties. Let's look at Monterey, okay? So this is Monterey. There you have 2016, you got 8 DJJ, 3 transfers, right? You see that the following year, actually in the wake of Prop 57, it goes up, right? DJJ goes down a bit. You then see this, and this goes way up. So let's see, what does the net numbers look? This is not what we want to see, right? This means that by 2018, you had a greater number of young people in the deep end, okay? I'm going to give one more example, and then we'll stop and talk about this. Is Santa Clara, another pattern where we don't want to see it. This is looking different in the state, right? So here's the year after. You see the year of Prop 57. We see these transfers are cut in half. DJJ numbers go up, but then they bounce all the way back up to their pre-57 numbers. And these go down to 9, much higher than they'd been pre-57 at 2, right? You had 9 out there. And when you look at what you're getting is, you're getting an increase over 2016. Yeah, I want to stop there and see if folks have thoughts, questions, what you know. If you're from Santa Clara, if you're from Monterey, this isn't sounding right, you know?
Yeah, that pretty much sounds right. This is Jose from Debug. Yeah, the DA always finds a way to, go through them loopholes. That's definitely what we were seeing. And also because in our county, I think that they don't have you can't do gang enhancements for the youth.
Yeah.
But if the word gang is mentioned anything throughout the case, you know what I mean? It's related with the arrest somehow, or maybe behavior while incarcerated, that usually gets an adult transfer. Yeah.
Got it. Other folks? We got some Monterey people on.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can just say that it sounds right to me. I think Monterey County, if we go back historically, I think they've always loved YA because there's always been a lot of Monterey County kids in there.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah, I agree with Israel. It looks right, sadly enough.
Yeah. Yep. And have you all, for the Monterey folks, have you all thought, like, now that blue option's going to go away, what are the challenges and risks moving forward for y'all?
I know immediate challenge is that I'm not really aware of any local alternatives.
Good.
Maybe just I don't know if they consider Rancho Cielo an alternative. Maybe we can push for it to be. But yeah, I don't know, Cesar.
I agree with you. You know, we kind of have a lack of services and options in Monterey County, and so, you know, with the lack of services and options, they tend to, you know, incarcerate. And so, you know, we need to definitely attack that head on.
And so the danger is these 9 up here next year end up orange, right? You get 24. They're saying, nah, there's nothing. The judges say there's nothing for real out there that I trust that is going to be the kind of treatment I want. And in their mind, they're probably thinking the kind of punishment I want, right? You know, and they're going to push it into the transfer hearing, right? This is Contra Costa. Some of them are mixed, right? So some of it's not completely clear. Okay, so this is Contra Costa, right? So you see in 2016, you had 19 commitments to DJJ and 4 transfers. Those completely disappear, and you get something that looks really good the next year. You get 7. That's like, you know, almost a third of what it was here to DJJ, and no transfers. But then it shoots back up to 17. So this is one of those cases where it's cloudy. Do we have anyone from Santa Clara? I mean, from Contra Costa here?
I'm from Contra Costa. Yeah, I think some of that is, boy, those are really funny numbers. I mean, some of it might be, it just takes a long time to get,
Yes,
you know, kids like actually sent to DJJ. I know the last couple of kids that like I've seen go have been on transfer cases that where they weren't transferred. But you know, our county probation recommends that kids get sent, and we end up having to do contested dispose on those. So it happens.
totally. Cool. So one thing to remember as we're going to kind of leave this and go to the second piece, thinking about prioritizing counties, but one thing to remember is these, you know, these blue and orange pieces, they're just a small piece of the whole pie, right? Okay, so we're going to want it. We're right now, because we're focusing on implementation of SB 823, we're focused on those, but we need to remember, what is this going to look like when we bring in all of the commitments to the ranch, when we bring in the commitments to the hall, right? Or the kids in the hall, when we bring in all of the out-of-home placements and the wardship probation, right? Because again, we need to be keeping our eye on the whole pie. And I want to just show y'all, let me just stop share. I want to show you, this isn't yet ready for to go live, but it will very soon. But I want to show you kind of how the these work. So this is what you would go. You would go online to this place called Tableau Public, and Anthony would know this, right? This is Orange County, and here you have this. You down here the county, right? So let's say we're going to go here. We want to see what's happening in, you know, let's see, what Riverside? Riverside. Okay. Well, then you go down, it pulls up the Riverside numbers for you, right? Okay. If you want to look at all of them, go up here, hit all. Okay. And then you're able to take this and export it as a PowerPoint slide, right? So then you can literally take this, bring it out here. But the thing that I was just kind of speaking about, this is everyone, right? This is all. I want to just show this isn't the right, just to give a sense of all the other stuff we're going to need to in future sessions take into consideration. I'm just going to bring in, these aren't the right measures, but camp ADP and juvenile hall ADP. Okay. So what you see is, remember the blue and purple that we're the orange and blue that we're talking about? It's a tiny piece of this, and this is going to be even bigger once we bring in probation numbers, right? So we're going to have to figure out how to get our eyes on the whole pie, on the whole picture. Okay, and okay, so I want to see if there are any questions about that before we go into the county by county prioritization.
What does ADP stand for?
Average daily population in the hall of the ranch. So it's a census count, right?
Thanks.
Of the number of folks there that day. And the other one, there's another one other. We also were able to use let's look at this. You know, and again, this is all sort of internal stuff, but we're also able to use the BSCC data. So let's say you want to also look at what's happening locally, right? So this looks at your bed rated capacity versus your average daily population, right? So this is Kern, for instance, and you're looking at the red line here says of all the beds, camp and hall, this is how much are available, 438. This is how much, the orange one is what you're using, right? And then down here it says, look at, you got 48% of your beds empty, you have 209 empty beds. And then it breaks it down. Here's the hall numbers, here's that. And again, you can go to, let's see. You can go to whatever county, right? You want to look at separately. So that's the kind of stuff that will allow us to get quickly into a county by county analysis. Any thoughts, questions, comments before we go to the next piece?
One thing that I just want to add to the looking at the capacity is that one of the things that we're really careful about and thinking about how to look at that is that, you know, sort of what Tia said in the beginning is that this isn't a shell game. We're not saying let's move, you know, kids in cages far away to kids in cages closer. We want a net decrease. And so looking at that capacity, especially for Board of Supervisor members or the county folks may say like, oh, problem solved. We'll just use these facilities. And we're saying we have to be more, you know, to be really pushing to say this isn't just about shifting kids from one place to another, but looking at who's in those facilities right now. Let's highlight the fact that they don't need to be there. How do we downshift the kids that are there? How do we change what is happening? So just being thoughtful about how we use that capacity of facilities and the number of beds, because a lot of the facilities have a lot of capacity and we don't want to just necessarily fill it up without thinking it through.
Laura, to your point, can I share my screen really quick to show one slide?
Yeah. Let's see. Abraham, can you give Beto sharing?
Yeah, most definitely.
Right.
Go ahead.
Okay. So this is the general fund expenditure for the city of Stockton, right? Look at economic development, 3%.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important. You know, if we look at some of these cities and counties and how much money they're investing in in economic development, we're a capitalist society and they're not investing in capitalism. Where are the jobs? Where's the economic development component to it? I'm not promoting capitalism, by the way. I'm just saying, you know, like,
yeah,
we have to use that analysis.
It don't make sense.
And of this 3% of the economic development, how much of it is spent in the poor neighborhoods versus the already well-to-do neighborhoods? Right? So you look at economic development, you look at community services, but then you look at police and fire.
Yep.
I have a friend that's from West Covina, and he was telling me that the fire department, they've only had 3 fires in the entire city all of last year, or 5 fires in the entire city all of last year. But they're such a huge percentage of the budget because they keep going out with the EMT. Like, why is the fire department accompanying the EMT?
Yep, that's right. That's right.
Like they're just cashing in on all of this overtime. And so if you hire 2 or 3 more officers or 2 or 3 more fire department, you save a lot of money on overtime, right? I'm not suggesting that we expand the department either, right? But again, we have to frame these arguments and show all of these different layers to it.
And what I love about that is that's the bigger vision. And I think Laura's talking about this as well, right? Which is like, we can't like, you know, you're going to have people who want to treat this like a technical problem. Oh, I got these people and I need to get them in these beds, but they're not thinking about, they're not being transformative. They're not thinking, I'm going to change how we think about safety. I'm going to change how we think about investment. And that's why this is important. The other thing we're doing is we're in the process of, we have this general fund expenditure breakdown for almost like for a huge proportion of every city in the United States, right? and that it lets you do this. And we're getting someone to help us put out a public facing dashboard that'll allow you to do this for your city. Then we can figure out how to bring it together, right? With this stuff, you bring it together. Now you got that, you pull in Stockton's, this picture, you can get it from Fresno, bam, you look at what it looks like, and we're able to look at it over 20 years, and you can see it growing, right? You see it getting bigger and bigger, right? That then becomes a powerful strategy and a powerful narrative strategy, right?
I mean, the city of Stockton, Stockton Unified School District, where I currently teach, they are cutting back 10% on everything except law enforcement. Everything's going to get cut 10% except for school police.
Dude, those fools passed a resolution saying we love our school police and we're going to protect them from any cuts. Like this is, you're in the wake of George Floyd. It was just blew my mind.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I mean, my apologies, I came in late, but I think that how we frame it and showing this type of data, it's very clear where the money's being, or the lack of investment.
Exactly. And that's a bigger transformative discussion. It also allows us to have alliances with school folks, with different people working with everyone pushing for economic development. We create like a more robust united front against them.
Right. So I'm more than happy to assist with any of this stuff. I actually have a master's degree in urban planning.
Oh, right on. Yes.
So I understand it. I see this through the planning perspective, right? In Stockton, we have no open spaces for after school activities. If you don't have a gym membership, you're screwed, because the parks are completely taken over by homeless people. And I mean, the lighting is really bad. So it creates these very interesting, even bus routes from South Stockton aren't connected to North Stockton, or Central Stockton, which is where the jobs are at. There's very limited opportunity. They're not being connected. So it breaks. There's a great book of a lawsuit that happened, I think in Connecticut. It's called Children in Room E4. And Children in Room E4, it's a lawsuit that actually was just settled like in 2010, I think.
Yeah.
And it was de facto segregation. And the city was built a certain way that kept minorities away from resources. And eventually, it was a 20-year lawsuit, but eventually the people won. But today, I don't know how they did to rectify that. But the way the city landscape is designed, it shapes this a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Gutierrez. Really appreciate it. We're gonna continue with
absolutely
with the data piece, and then we have a question from Sergio. Go ahead, Sergio.
Well, thanks, Tia, for this great information. I think with that, I just really wanted to think about, and maybe you'll get to this later on, but just thinking about like, what's it going to take to get folks trained up to utilize this data set in a way that's going to be impactful, right? Not just for, the purposes of their organization, but for like the actual work that has to happen to push supervisors and, organize and do that advocacy work, right? I think that from my end of it, right, from a funder perspective, it'd be really good to kind of hear what that strategy is, because I think, I'm looking at this as a way that we looked at the LCFF, years ago, right, where, by merely passing the legislation, the fight, had to transition down to the district and county level, right, and we weren't prepared for that. And so we see what we see now with LCFF, right, where it's not necessarily doing what was the intended, the intended piece of legislation. And so I just want to make sure that we don't fall into that same trap here, right, that we're really supporting our communities and gaming them up to utilize this data to really push to get, push for the will, right, to find these alternatives to incarceration and probation and punitive measures. In every community, right? So just wanted to hear kind of a little bit of that. If you know that, if not, then I can also take that offline as well.
If you hadn't gone over to the foundation side, I would say you're like the single best person to do this training, bro. I mean, all of this is based on what y'all did at UC Davis. Word. I mean, this is just like our janky version of it. So no, I mean, all of this, it's not just that community needs to be trained in it, that all of this data, local data doesn't have meaning without local context, without people who know deeply what's going on in that community. And they can say, oh no, I know that's because of that. Like all of this, you could have your damn PhD in statistics, you could know, like it doesn't make sense until folks get to interact with it and explain it. That's the meaning making. So it's just like, that has to be the end game, right? Like we can't even use it in here when we're trying to think strategy if we don't have folks helping us interpret what that looks like in Kings County, what that looks like in Tulare, right? What that looks like in California City, right? So that's a huge piece, and I think it's something collectively we have to do, So figuring out how we do that and that's what this next piece about. It's not only how we do it, but how we do this in areas that are organizing deserts. Okay, so what we're going to talk about next is really like, okay, we all can do what we're doing in the counties that we're in, right? But we actually know that some of the counties that are most at risk for some of the unintended negative consequences of the closure of DJJ, we don't have anyone in. And the fact is, they are not like, all of us along the coast, honestly, all of us along the coast, we've had like 50 years of energy, over that, 100. We have a long history of movement building. We have a long history of advocacy. This is where the money is. But increasingly, this isn't where the harshest systems are, right? So how do we build that out? How do we build that out in partnership, in true kind of shoulder to shoulder partnership, not in like, my ass is going to come in here and tell you all what to do, right? So I think that piece is absolutely essential, and it comes to this next piece. Okay, I'm going to go back to there. Are there any other questions before we get into the next piece? Okay. So this part, I really need everyone's feedback, okay? Because I'm going to talk about looking at two variables at the same time. And I'm trying to figure out how to explain this in the right way. So I need to know if this is working, okay? So first of all, we have all these counties, okay? And we need to say we only have so much money and so much human power, right? And we know there's a ton of need out there. We can't get to every county, right? We can't even get to every county that we think, if we all just came up and said, oh, I think this county, we just can't do that. We need to have some way to prioritize them. And in order to prioritize these, you need to have some type of criteria, okay? Now, the criteria can be broad, right? So the criteria can be like, the criteria doesn't just have to be quantitative measures, right? Certainly things like the political environment, whose connections you have there, right? That like, there's a bunch of power analysis stuff and contextual stuff that's really important, whether there's a funder there. And all of that stuff remains important. But today, I'm just gonna focus on the numbers, okay? I'm just going to say, well, let's just use the numbers and see what they tell us. Then we need to think about how we bring in all those other factors, but this is just the numbers piece. Does that make sense? Okay, so there's basically two numbers that we're going to look at and we're going to use to prioritize the counties. The first is the number of youth, okay? So this is literally the annual number of youth committed to DJJ or transferred to adult court and an important thing right here is when we're looking at this, we took 3 years of data and we averaged it, okay? So because some of these numbers are small and they move a lot over that time. So we're going to be looking at the number of youth annually, either sent to DJJ, transferred to adult court, or both, right? And it's going to be an average between 216 and 218, right? The second thing, so that the number of youth is kind of like the scope, like how many folks it's impacting. But then there's another measure, and this is about the probability of harsh adjudication, okay? And what this is about is it's the likelihood, depending on what county you're in, what is the likelihood that if you're a youth, you're sent to the deep end of the system, right? So basically, just like we say, all of for the same behavior, there are radically different consequences based on the color of your skin. What we're looking at right now is based on the county you live in. There are radically different probabilities. And that probability is expressed as a rate, right? So it's how many young people are committed to DJJ per 100,000 youth. That's how we talk about that likelihood, right? And what you're going to see is some counties are much meaner than others, right? Any questions about those two variables? Okay. So what we're going to do here is we're going to talk about both these variables, okay? And we're going to create different categories. What we're going to do is think about this as a graph, okay? On this axis right here, we're going to have number of youth, okay? So and we're going to like stack up all the counties, right? By the number they send to say DJJ, okay? Every year, right? And if you send 0, you're down here. You send low numbers, you're here. If you're middle, you're here. If you're high, you're there, okay? And then along this axis right here, we're going to put harshness, right? Okay. And harshness, this is going to be, are you in your county, are you less likely or most likely or in the middle to send someone to the deep end, right? So what's the probability? Okay. And so when you bring these two together, you get 4 groups, okay? 4 different categories. And that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be putting counties in these 4 groups. Okay, so this first group right here, okay, so right here in this group, this is number of youth low, right, and less likely. So this is they're sending very few kids, and actually the probability, they're not that harsh, right? So there's that group. Then we go up here, we say, well, there's another group here, and this is like the one down there in that you're less likely. It's not a super harsh jurisdiction, right? You're less likely, but there are really big numbers. Like how does that happen? It happens because you're a big ass county, right? Okay, so you may say, oh, we're only sending 0.01% of our kids, but if you're LA County, that's a lot of kids. So this is less likely, but high numbers. This category here, this is the money category, right? Because this is the one, these folks here both are sending high numbers of kids and they're harsh as hell, right? They're most likely to send to the deep end. These are the ones we're most interested in, right? Those would be the highest priority folks because they're both sending a good number and they're more likely. Your probability of ending up in the deep end is the highest if you live in that county. And then finally here, this is another category here. These are harsh. These are those counties where it's very likely that you're going to end up in the deep end, but they're tiny counties. This is your rural counties, right? So they may be like sending hella kids away. The probability is very high, but they don't have a lot of young people. So they're low numbers, but high likelihood. And so when we're talking about it, what we're going to do is we're going to say these aren't priorities, right? If you low numbers and you're not too harsh, we're going to put you aside. This is our top priority, right? High numbers and most likely to be harsh, right? Now, we also are probably going to want to sometimes come over here, steal a couple folks from here. We might want to steal a couple folks from here. Alternatively, we might want to have a different kind of strategy. What's our strategy for these rurals, right? But for right now, let's just think about how we get to this top right-hand box. So I want to stop there. Does that make sense? Does that work for folks?
Hello, Tia. How you doing, Tia? This is Raymond. So I jumped on a little bit late.
Sure.
And I just started seeing you talking about high numbers, low numbers, and our probability of you. Can you give me a little update, please?
Sure. Right on. So basically what we're doing here is we're categorizing counties. We're trying to figure out what counties are the most important to pay attention to with around the closure of DJJ. We're trying to identify what counties are most likely that we have those unintended consequences, like we get more transfers to the adult system, right, with this closure. So we're trying to categorize counties, and what we're categorizing them by how many young people they send to the deep end. That's the orange. Those are the high numbers or low numbers. And then the harshness. And what the harshness means is the probability, if you're a young person in that county, that you end up in the deep end, right? Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, thank you, T. You're always great. I see all this. You're good at this stuff. Thank you.
Right on then. Any other thoughts or questions about this, Laura? I don't know if you have some.
You know, one thing I'm adding only, and I don't mean to complicate it, but one other thing that's not included here that we're going to be taking into account when we think about those next questions, like the one we talked about with transfer hearings and transfer motions, is looking at the offenses that kids are being sent to these deep end consequences for. So in some counties, the kids that are going to DJJ or adult court are the kids that have been accused of the most serious offenses. So it's almost all homicide offenses. In some counties, the kids that are being sent to DJJ and to adult court are much less serious offenses. And so we also want to be taking into account another measure that says, which of these counties are using the deepest ends of the system for reasons that we know we can build up community-based capacity. It's not a hard argument. We believe that we can do a lot more for kids that are accused of the really serious offenses too. We're not taking that off the table, but we want to be looking at the offenses in some of these counties where we know the instinct of the judge and the prosecutors are to send kids for low-level reasons like burglaries and things like that, that can be trumped up with a number of charges to get to DJJ and adult court, or low-level assaults, low-level robberies that can be brought there. So that's another piece of this that's not part of this analysis, but is going to be part of those next level questions when we say, what gets you in one of these boxes, and what do we need to look, how do we need to look more carefully at what's happening in the counties?
Yeah, and that's like once we figure out, okay, these are our priority counties, then we're going into each county and we're asking exactly those questions, like what's going on here, but like we're also asking the really important questions about racial inequities, right? Because we're just looking at counties, we're not looking at it, but so there are all of these important questions that we need to ask once we've prioritized these, right? We got to get under them, because those are the kind of questions that are going to be so key to organizing people in that community, right? And to figuring out what the demands are, right? For how you're going to disrupt this system, like understanding how it's working currently. So all of that then becomes like an input into how you would strategize with folks in that county. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. So let's go into it, okay? So we're going to start here. This is a map, and again, all of these will exist on Tableau that you can look at them, and it's good because you can go over them and you can hover over them and learn a lot more about this. But here we're just looking at the average number of youth that the counties committed to DJJ annually, okay? We took 16, 17, 18, and we averaged it, right? So the darker the orange, the brown, that's the big numbers, right? And you can see right here, you can see the Southern California and the Central Valley here, really, they're kind of dominating. The South is dominating, right? You see Contra Costa sticking out over there, right? Now let's look at specifically what are the top 10, okay? So number one, no surprise, is Los Angeles, right? It's 82. That's because it's a huge county, right? So, but sending 82 kids, but it's a giant county. The second one is San Bernardino. And then you have smaller counties like Fresno at 16. Remember the average among counties. So if you took the average county, it's about 4. Most counties send about 4 young people to DJJ every year, right? But you got a place like San Bernardino that's almost 5 times that at 17, or Fresno 4 times that at 16, Contra Costa 14, Riverside 11, Tulare 11, Monterey 9. Monterey is teeny, right? Santa Clara 9, Kern 9, San Diego, which is pretty big, and then Little Kings, right? These 10 counties, there's 58 counties. These 10 counties account for just about 80% of total admissions to DJJ, okay? So I'm going to stop there, see if there are questions about what we're looking at here. Cool. So this is the number stuff. Now we're going to look, so this is the number. Now we're going to look at the probability of harsh adjudication. That means we're moving from absolute numbers to rates, right? And here again, okay? Remember right here, we were looking at this, the big ones that were sending the big numbers, it was the South. Now look at the dark green. What happens? It moves up north, right? You still see though, that core Kings, Tulare, Monterey, you still see the central folks, but you just see this popping up here, right? With these folks. Let's take a look at what that looks like in terms of the top 10, okay? So on average, at 100,000 young people, most counties, the average number is 8.2, okay? So 8.2 young people at 100,000 get sent to the deep end, right? But look at what it is in Kings. It's almost 70, right? It's almost 70. That's 9 times what it is. In Trinity, 53. In Humboldt, 37, in Butte, 36, Monterey, 30, right? Tulare, 27, Fresno, 21, Merced, 21, Contra Costa, 18, and Solano, 16.8, 17, okay? Now, what you're seeing here, right, is there's a lot of these little counties, right? They don't have a lot of folks. These would be like, these are going to be those counties that are really harsh, but they don't send a lot of folks away because they don't have a lot of kids there, right? But you notice something, watch this, okay? Go, okay? See, look at this, look at Fresno, look at the dark ones, look at the dark. You see there's some overlap, right? Fresno, King, Tulare, there, Monterey. There are those that are on both of these, right? Those are the kind of counties that we would be wanting to prioritize. Let's look at like what it looks like, okay? So this is this 2x2, okay? So it's a whole bunch of dots. Every dot's a county, okay? On up here, right, is the number of youth. The higher you are on this, regardless of where you are, the higher you are, the more kids you're sending annually. And then the probability of harsh treatment right down here, the further you are out to this side, right, across here, the harsher you are, the more likely you are to send folks away. So what does that mean? That means here, these are if we just were looking at DJJ commitments, and remember, we have to look at both. So the next thing we're going to turn to is the transfers, right? But if we just were looking at DJJ commitments, I want to point one thing out. See Los Angeles up there? See that right there? That's not really where Los Angeles is. Los Angeles is really way, 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 way higher, right? But it's so high that if I keep it, it distorts this whole, everyone ends up like down here because it's so high. So what I have to do with LA is I throw it out and then I bring it back in. But this is where it lives. It just would be much, much higher because its numbers are closer to 80 something, okay? But here we have, these are the high numbers and most likely, okay? Now, this right here, remember what these folks are, right? These are the low numbers and most likely to be harsh, right? And it's what we thought, right? So it's Trinity, Humboldt, Yolo, Sutter, small rural counties, right? You know, but then you see some like Butte. Look at Butte's up there, right? You have some of these rural counties, Tulare, Kern, which are managing not only to be harsh, but to get to higher numbers, right? And then over here, these are the high numbers and the less likely. Now, one thing about this is where it's like, so look at Santa Clara and Riverside, right? Santa Clara and Riverside, they're contributing a lot of youth to these systems. And they're right around the average in terms of harshness, right? So, you know, you can see that there's different colors on this. So I did a statistical technique called cluster analysis, and it creates sort of what the clusters are. So you don't need to abide by exactly these quadrants, right? You know, you get some discretion here. And so what they're saying is they think Riverside, Santa Clara, and San Diego should go in there. And they think that San Francisco and Sonoma shouldn't, right? That's what it means statistically. But again, those are the kind of calls that we're going to have to make together. And then finally, these are the ones that we're not. These are the lows, right? Lows and less likely. And so this is an example right here, okay, of picking those counties that are basically in here, exercising some discretion, like I let San Francisco, I think, and Sonoma go, right? But I brought in Riverside and I brought in Santa Clara, right? And so these then become our high highs, right? And so San Bernardino, Fresno, Contra Costa, Kern, Tulare, Santa Clara, Butte, Monterey, Tulare, Kings, Solano, and Merced. Los Angeles, Riverside, oh, and Santa Clara's on there twice, oops. And so this then, the ones in red are the ones where we don't have folks. So when we're talking about, okay, prioritizing where we would think about putting energy, it's those red ones that jump out. So I want to stop there and see any thoughts. Laura, I don't know if you want to add some stuff before. I know you have to go soon.
Unfortunately, I do have to hop off. I thought that was, I think it was great.
Okay, cool. Any thoughts? Check out King over here. I mean, look at that. Look at Kings and Tulare, right? That means Tulare over here is way above the average in terms of harshness and way above the average in terms of number, right?
Thank you.
This
Go ahead.
is-
We have Linda.
Sorry, this is,
And then Erin.
sorry, I can wait.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't realize someone put it in the chat. I'm bad at paying attention to the chat and the screen at the same time. I'm just wondering, have you looked at this to your clustering, made me think of this question, with the numbers for county placements in camp and
Yes.
juvenile hall commitments?
Yeah.
Because it makes me think too, the counties that maybe seem a little less harsh, but are enamored of their own county placements worry me. And I'm thinking of San Diego, right? Like with this giant. That's just a question if you have that too.
Yes, and that's well, that's what we want to build next, and that's why I'm so happy, Erin, that you and Meredith are here, and that we're talking tomorrow too, right? Which is that's what we need to integrate into this, right? So we have the whole kind of dynamic system. But I need your help on that.
Thank you. We have Linda from Courage. Go ahead.
Oh, I just had a quick question. So in regards to the counties in red, like Kern, Tulare, when you say we don't have folks there, are you specifically referring to CBOs or just referring overall like other organizations who are fighting against, who are fighting to defund the police and getting young people out of juvie and jails?
Yeah, it's really narrow. This is just membership in CAYCJ. So that's the whole thing, is like what we're going to get to do. You know, so I spent the last 5 years in many of these counties, in particular the Central Valley counties, organizing to get police out of school. So I got I got all these connections with folks doing that work there, right? They can be plugged into this. And we all have all our different connections, because like once we get down to this, we can begin to map it and say, like, what are the base building groups? What are the youth development groups? Who are the potential allies there that we could partner with? So, so yeah, the red is just super narrow. It's like basically, Abraham, do we have members in that? And do we have members? Should San Bernardino be red? Do we have COPE?
We have Justice from Sigma Beta Xi, and the question is, who we have from San Bernardino? COPE. I'm not sure if any members from San Bernardino.
Yeah, I think I don't know if they don't. So Congregations Organizing for Prophetic Engagement in San Bernardino, I think, is a member. They are they?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'll.
Okay, so they're then they're a member of the coalition around getting police out of school, and they've done a lot of stuff around defund and around like racism as a public health issue. So it's like, this is how we're going to be able to put all of the stuff we know about these different areas to being like, oh, this is someone we can bring in, right?
So to touch base on that, I know of a youth justice organization in San Bernardino that I can definitely invite into the space.
Awesome. What is it? Who is it?
ICUC?
Oh, yes. Didn't ICUC used to be a part of this? I guess maybe not. Yeah, they're the PICO affiliate, right?
Yes, yeah.
That would be they're awesome. That's exactly the kind of that's how we're gonna do this. Is just exactly through that. Any other questions? Okay. I know this is a lot of data, but we're gonna go on now to transfers to adult court. Okay. See, which is a chat.
Sorry, Tia, I'm so sorry. I have a quick question. This is Nicole. Can you hear me?
Yep.
What does harshness mean? Like, do you know what I mean? How does that defined?
Totally. So it's literally the probability that if you're a young person in that county, you end up sent to either DJJ or adult court. That's
okay. Got it.
Yeah. Okay. And so like we talked about, there's a lot of nuances there. And we don't have all the county stuff, and we're going to need to bring that in, right? But it's just, we're just using that pretty simple definition. Laura, are you still around? You had a great point in the quote in the chat.
Oh, I was just about to log off. I was just saying that the data source, there's a problem with data sources. This is in the weeds and probably pretty boring, but one thing that we know is that the Department of Justice, the data source we get everything from the counties from, they collect data differently than the Board of State and Community Corrections, which is another repository of data. And they have the best data on kids that are in halls and camps, but their data is not broken down by race and ethnicity. And so as we're looking at the data and always wanting to have an eye towards the disparate impact that the systems are having on young people of color, that source is unhelpful for us in all of those ways. So we have looked more towards the Department of Justice data because we can see a racial breakdown there, but they collect their data in funky categories. And so they have this category after going to court. You know, DJJ is an easy one, that's in one category, but one of the categories they have is called secure county. And within secure county, they include kids that go to any county facility, hall or camp. And there's a little footnote in there that says also kids on electronic monitoring are sometimes counted here. So it's a giant mess. And so just to Aaron's question, you know, the sources of data for that piece of it is not going to be, we're not going to be able to compare apples to apples with the DOJ data because it's just not collected in the right way. So we'll be looking to BSCC, understanding we won't have a race analysis and understanding that it will be a little bit different from the DOJ data, but it's much more current too. They're good at collecting data. They just won't collect it by race.
Well,
So
Lord,
thank you all
so much. I know you need to go, but you've been so amazingly helpful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
See y'all
Bye-bye.
Friday.
So we're going to switch now to the transfers to adult court. And again, remember they live in relationship to each other. They offset one another. So we can't just look at the DJJ stuff because there's going to be counties that don't send no one to DJJ, but just go heavy on transfers to adult court, right? So we need to look at both of them. So this first here, this is the number of youth. This is the average number of youth transferred to adult court annually. So we took 16, 17, 18, and we caught an average from those, okay? So again, look at the dark colors, right? So this is the pure numbers, right? And so in here we're talking about the rates and the winners here, right? The in terms of the absolute numbers here. I'm sorry, no, we're not talking about rates. See, I get so confused. We're talking about absolute numbers here, okay? But here we're talking about numbers transferred. So the ones with the biggest, right, are San Bernardino, right? And again, you see, look at there's Orange, Riverside, LA, right? Again, the South and Central areas. And these are the highest, okay? So the average overall for transfers to adult court across counties is 2, okay? Orange sent 26 on average. San Bernardino sent 23 on average. Riverside 20, LA 14, Santa Clara 13, Tulare 10, Santa Barbara 8, Madera 7, King 7, Sutter 6, Solano 6, and Yuba 5. Little Yuba, Little Sutter, right? So this is the absolute numbers. And again, what we have to do is we kind of go over and look at rates, right? So the harsh piece. So again, now we're dealing with the probability of harsh adjudication. In this case, we're looking at transfers to adult court. So remember here, you see the dark again, it's all these big southern counties and these central counties. And then again, we see the same pattern, right? All of these northern counties, these really, really harsh northern counties, but they're little, right? So the probability of you going, of you being sent to the deep end is really high, but they're small. They don't have a lot of young people, right? So they don't send a huge number. So, but you can see here, look at Tulare and Kings and Fresno. You can see there's overlap, right? There's overlap. And then there's places like Modoc, right? At 65. So let's talk about who those top folks are. So the average rate, so this is the rate, not the absolute number. So the average rate of transfers to adult court per 100,000 young people, 13 to 17, it's around 14, okay? Cuba has it has 98. So 98 per 100,000. Sutter, 89. Modoc, Little Modoc, 65. Kings, 63. Madera, 57. Lake, 36. This is, I think, Santa, oh man, I'm not sure what Santa is. Oh, Santa Barbara. This is Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara, suddenly Santa Barbara. So suddenly you're getting, so now we're also getting new counties, right? That we hadn't seen before on the DJJ side. So Santa Barbara at 32, Tulare at 25, Tehama at 24, and Humboldt at 23. Okay. And again, there's some that are on both, but we're also seeing probably a lot of those little guys. So let's do the same exercise we did before.
Tia,
Yes, please.
This is Beto. Tia, could you confirm? I was told when I was working inside DJJ that Fresno County or that counties who committed juveniles to the adult court received extra funds for doing that. They got like I don't know, there was some extra subsidies or something. Kind of like bilingual kids to schools, where the bilingual kid, they get more money per bilingual kid.
I'm going to put it out to the group. Do folks know about this? I don't have any info on it.
Because one of the guards was sharing that's why Fresno County just committed a bunch of the guys to the adult court, and then they warehoused them there because they were considered adult until they turned 18, and then at 18 they would just hand them over to the adult system.
Oh wow, yeah. No, I'm not sure. Anyone else on have any info on that? Okay, we're gonna now kind of look again here at our 4 groups again, okay? So this right here is the high numbers and most likely to be harsh, right? So here we see San Bernardino, San Joaquin, Tulare, Santa Barbara, Madera, King, Sutter. There's Yuba way out there, Solano, right? This right here, now we see a whole bunch of these, right? Del Norte, Modoc, Lake. These are the really harsh ones, but they're tiny. I mean, Modoc has something like, I don't know, it's like 600 young people or something. I mean, it's really tiny, right? But they're really, really, really harsh. And they're really harsh. When they're really harsh, a lot of these folks right here, you didn't see all of these folks like Lake over on the DJJ one, right? Because these folks aren't even doing DJJ. They're just going straight to the transfer, right? So there's that group. Then over here, we have the high numbers. These are the big counties, but not as harsh, right? And so here again, we got to make those calls like, okay, what about Santa Clara? Look at, there's LA. It's giant, right? But it's below average in terms of harshness, actually, right? There's Orange, Riverside. One thing to be clear about is we're not saying any of the work that's currently going on stops, right? Like, this is not a matter of like, oh no, we're not going to pay. Like, no, damn, we get as much energy and support for the local campaigns as we possibly can, and we build them up, and we build up the state supports. But this is really thinking about, if we want to go beyond and recruit folks, right, and bring folks in to do more, how do we prioritize those counties? And so this right here, again, there's going to be some discretion here, and then there's a whole bunch of folks that just are low. They're not sending lots of folks. They're not very harsh, right? We just take those off, okay? And so this is one potential list, right? Okay. You see slightly different names coming up, right? Because of this offset thing. Some folks are, there are groups that do both high DJJ and high adult court, but there's also definitely a group that just does one or the other too. So this is where you're getting that. Want to open up to questions?
Yeah, I have a question. This is Miguel from Anti-Recidivism Coalition. When we're looking at the adult numbers, are we looking at a population of only 16 and above? Because those are the only ones that qualify, as compared to those that qualify for DJJ. It's the whole spectrum of young people. And so I can you clarify that?
That's a great point. We should actually change the denominator, right? We should. So this is 13 to 17, right? So really it should be after what year? After
16.
Yeah. So like, yeah, that's a great point. It won't change the relative space these are, but it'll change the actual rates in a big way. It's a great point. Other thoughts? Now, I don't know anyone in Sutter or Madera. I don't know anyone in Yuba. The other ones, yeah. Thoughts, reflections? Okay, cool. Let's do the last piece. So the last thing we did is we basically combined them, okay? We said, okay, let's take, what we're going to do is we're going to take all the commitments to DJJ, we're going to add in the transfers to adult court, right? So this is kind of like a summary of like everything, right? We're not going to keep them separate. So here, this is going to look very familiar when you look at the number, right? Where the numbers are into the deep end. it's Southern California, but you see it comes up here into Contra Costa and Santa Clara too. These are the top folks. Okay, again, of course, LA leads, then San Bernardino, Riverside, Orange, Fresno. This is Santa Clara, Tulare, Contra Costa, San Jose, and Kings, right? And then when we look at rates, same kind of pattern. The small northerns start to jump up, but we see again, this, I mean, Kings, Fresno, and Tulare are an issue. Like I don't think there's this triangle right here is sending a huge number and in a really harsh way to the deep end of the system. We're going to need to think about that. And Monterey very consistently is popping up. So this whole area here, these are the top folks. So remember the average overall when you take both of those is 22 young people per 100,000 going into the deep end. But you have a county like Kings where it's fully 133 young people per 100,000, or Yuba and Sutter where it's 98. Modoc and Humboldt, 65, 61, Madera, 57, Trinity, 53, Tulare, 52, and 44, Butte. These are almost, these are really, really dominated by those rurals. And then finally, this is the same thing we did before, and here's where we end up, right? You know, there's, you know, with Madera and Sutter, again, this is like when we're trying to think, they're very, very close to the average line, right? They're just very harsh in terms of, they're close to the average line in terms of the numbers they send, but they're really, really harsh. And so it's like, it would be weird to include Sutter, but not Yuba, right? Or Madera, but not Humboldt. So there's just those kind of things that we have to take into account. Ultimately, this is kind of what we're left with to think about and talk more about, and we'll talk more about it Friday. But what this is this is the four categories. This is for commitment to DJJ, the green is transfer to adult court, and this is combined. And we've listed out the groups that were the priorities, and then we made those red. And so we need to do some thinking, and this is where we want to open it up, but just some thinking about, okay, if we take up some subset of the red, like what do we want to focus on in these different counties, right? We know that with the combined, these yellow ones are just high priority, they're everywhere. But right here for the high rates and high number DJJ folks, so here it could be for these folks, we're most concerned that all of those people, they're sending big numbers to DJJ and they're really harsh about it, that with no DJJ option, and they don't think there are real alternatives available, right? That they go to transfer, right? So that's the danger. And there are we thinking about, one way to think about it is, this is like, how are we gonna, this is the most pressing issue is the system capacity concerns, right? The availability of secure facilities and alternative treatment. That's really pressing, but like back to what Aaron was saying, it also needs to be weighed against the danger of, you know, expanding that, this net widening, right? Essentially, like we open up more space for these relatively small numbers, but they're big in terms of when you compare it to other counties. The danger is that it also opens up kind of ranching and camp capacity, and folks that might have formerly been in the camp or ranch, or everyone's pushed further down. So that would be for that group. For this green group over here, so this is a lot of the, here you have a lot of those smaller rurals, but this is really like where it's probably most pressing around judicial and system leader education, right? You might also think that these could be places where you want to think about finding a participatory defense partner, because these folks are already sending lots of people to adult court, okay? So they're likely in the absence going to continue to do this and likely increase, right? And then of course the alternative treatment capacity is going to be important. And this final one is just our highest priority. And that kind of brings us to the end of the kind of this overview of this process. I want to open it up right now. We have maybe 10 minutes just for questions, thoughts. There's tons of next steps in this. Nothing's done. Like we need to have a substantive conversation about kind of what this means and really what are the ones we're prioritizing. But this is just an introduction to thinking about one way that we can use data to inform that conversation.